Good evening and welcome to the 36th Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Tonight you'll be hearing from State Representatives Noel Frame and Liz Berry. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I will read those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your questions live via the comment section, so please submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we begin answering questions, I'd like to open the floor up to our lawmakers for some brief opening remarks. We'll begin with Rep. Frame. Representative Frame, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Megan, and good evening, everyone, for joining us tonight. We are so grateful that you are spending this lovely rainy evening hanging out with us. I am Representative Noel Frame. I have served as your representative for 6 years and change. This was my 7th legislative session representing the good people of the 36th District, and it continues to be such an honor and a pleasure. I am so excited to talk with you all tonight about the good work we've done this last session. It's been a really deeply difficult couple of years for our community, for our state and our nation. The challenges keep on coming, but I'm proud of the way that we've really come together, dug in deep, really acknowledged the challenges that everybody is facing, and tried to meet that moment as your representatives in government. So we have lots of good things to talk about tonight. But with that, I'll just say thank you again and turn it over to my good seatmate, Representative Berry.
Thank you so much, Noel. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you again. Liz Berry, I was just elected to serve to represent you in the 36th District Legislature in 2020. This was my first short 60-day session. We have so many great things to report to you. I was just down in Olympia today at the bill signing with Governor Inslee for my bill to ban untraceable homemade ghost guns. We also were able to ban high-capacity magazines and make sure that guns can't be used at polling places and school board meetings for intimidation. Many of you may know my story. Ending gun violence in our communities is personal for me as a former legislative director to Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. In the horrific shooting in Tucson, my friend and colleague Gabe Zimmerman was killed, and this work to end gun violence is personal, and I'm so glad to do it on behalf of all of you in the legislature. Can't wait to dive into your questions. Fun things going on. I think Noel and I are finally rested up after that last couple weeks was really rough, but we're here for it, and we love being able to represent you in Olympia. Thank you.
Great, and thank you both. So to kick things off this evening, our first question is, when will we get sales tax relief? It's time to quit having the most regressive tax system.
Well, I will tackle this one. Yes, I do love the 36th District for caring about tax reform as much as we do. I think most of you probably know that I have the great honor of serving as the chair of the House Finance Committee. I am the third of the last 5 chairs that have been from the 36th District. Senator Carlisle before he went over to the Senate, and then Representative Tarleton before she retired, and now me. So I think about reforming our tax code all day, every day. As it relates to sales tax specifically, I'm really proud to report, last year we passed the Working Families Tax Credit, something that had been on the books for over a decade, but had never been funded. And the Working Families Tax Credit is a targeted tax credit aimed at providing relief from the sales tax for our working families who, because of the way our tax code is structured, tend to pay something like 18% of their income in taxes, which is 7 times more than the wealthiest, highest income households in the state, which pay 3% or less of their income in taxes. So that Working Families Tax Credit is a really key tool that we passed last year. The program is getting stood up right now. In our state budget this year, we invested $10 million in community-based outreach to ensure that families know that they qualify for this tax credit, get signed up, and are ready to claim that cash, get it back into their pocket next year. There was a lot of discussion this session about expanding that program, and there's actually bipartisan support for that. We held off on doing that this year for what I just said. The program is literally still being stood up, and we needed to get that underway successfully before we expand it. Expansions that we could do, we could look at expanding the amount of the credit. We could expand who qualifies for the credit. There were some discussion about broad-based sales tax cuts. Interestingly enough, not a lot of support for that on either side of the aisle. Lots of interest in doing it in a more thoughtful, targeted way to make sure that the households where it has the deepest impact are the ones that are getting those getting that targeted relief. So excited about that. And of course, broader structural work continues with the tax structural work group that I co-chair with Senator Keith Wagner. Next meeting is March 30th, where we'll start to really see the rubber hit the road and see what some of those proposals may look like next year. So tune in. The website is taxworkgroup.org if you want to check our progress. Thanks for the question.
Wow, Noel can really nerd out about taxes. I hope everyone enjoyed that thorough answer.
What hashtag tax nerd? Hashtag tax justice. I do think about it quite a bit. Thank you, CJ. Thank you.
And thank you for your response. So our next question is on the governor's emergency powers. So Washington needs to reform the governor's emergency powers. When will that happen?
Oh, I'll take that one. Thank you for that question. We had a bill this year. It was bipartisan. It came over from the Senate, and it would set up a system for adequate checks and balances around this issue by creating a permanent joint legislative review oversight committee of the four corners. So that means the House and Senate Dems on the Republican and Democratic sides. We were prepared to support that bill. I think I can speak for Noel. I was a yes on that bill myself. Unfortunately, it was 5909. We brought it up on the floor. We started to consider it, and this is actually very rare. It was yanked from the floor because what we were seeing was Republicans were starting to, I guess the word is filibuster. They were just trying to waste time and run out the clock for whatever reason. I don't really know if it was tied to that bill or something else, but they were trying to kill that bill and other bills, and it came up right around a cutoff time, and we didn't really have time to do that kind of thing. They argued that the governor's emergency powers aren't how government is supposed to work. And, we had a solution to that, and they decided that they didn't want to play ball on that. So unfortunately, it didn't pass. I hope it comes back next year. You can count on my support for that bill. And sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. And I'm learning a lot as a new legislator how these things happen. And I will look for that next year and keep you informed on how that proceeds. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. So this is just a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with your 36 district representatives, and you can submit a question live in the comment section. Now we're going to go to our next question, which is on homelessness. So the new state budget includes an impressive amount of money for dealing with homelessness and creating new affordable housing. What are the plans to get this money into action as rapidly as possible?
Thanks for that question. And I appreciate the acknowledgement that they were big investments. But before I even dive into the implementation question, I really just want to highlight that investment. Homelessness in our communities, I mean, this is literally a humanitarian crisis. And the investments we have made in this session and in the initial 21-23 operating budget last year that we built upon this year, this is the most significant investments that we have made in state history in addressing housing and homelessness. I don't know about you all. I have tents a block from my front door. I have them in my parks. I have them by the grocery store. It is heartbreaking. And just moving people from one location to the next is clearly not doing anything. We have to get at the root causes of these issues. And the root causes are putting roofs over people's heads and wrapping them around with the services that they need to stay in that housing and be successful. And so the big investments that were talked about, I mean, we're talking $1.7 billion in the original operating budget, another $318 million this year in the supplemental, and then over $500 million in the capital budget for like acquisition of housing and building housing. So I really hope people hear that and see that. In terms of getting the money out, these programs are running through the Department of Commerce, which I will tell you, in the midst of the pandemic, we have given the Department of Commerce a lot of additional responsibilities. And they are really doing a two-track process where they are working with counties in particular. It's really the counties that distribute these funds in a really direct way, watching like whose rental assistance dollars from the federal government are running out, who's got that money ready to push out now, who's got capital projects that they're ready to purchase, like hotels. We've heard a lot about King County buying up hotels to get people immediately housed. And at the same time, we're getting that money out, rent assistance, capital dollars, et cetera. At the same time, Commerce is doing program design for ongoing work. A lot of the money that we've done this year, particularly in capital, is one time, but we did pass a new document recording fee last year, which is ongoing funding. And that needs to ensure that we have equitable access and outcomes to those programs, that we're looking at the root causes of homelessness and how they look different in different communities. How somebody presents who's homeless, who is, for instance, a white male in his 50s, is different than what homelessness looks like in the Asian Pacific Islander community, for instance, where we might not see folks outside, but they're doubling up in other families' houses, for instance. Those are both families experiencing homelessness in different ways, and we need programs that address both of those situations. So dual track program design and getting money out to counties right away. Again, Barry, I'm a nerd. I dive in deep.
She totally nerded out on that. Always count on Noel for those answers. I would say on a third thing that we can be doing at this to be a good partner at the state legislative level, which Noel and I have supported, is policies that keep people in their homes. Because we know once people are kicked out or evicted from their homes, it's much harder to get them housed. So I think those three approaches, which we have supported over the last 2 years for sure and beyond, are what we're doing in the legislature to help be a partner at the state level to solve this urgent problem.
Totally. $45 million of additional dollars just for rent assistance this session. Yeah. Great point, Liz.
Go team.
All right. I think we're ready for the next one.
Yes, definitely go team. And our next question is on ferries. So Washington's marine highways and ferries during the pandemic have provided unreliable, inconsistent, and poor service. What is being done to ensure the system offers more accountable service?
I will take this question. I love this question. I am so proud to be your urbanist voice on the House Transportation Committee. I also serve in the House Environment and Energy Committee, and the two of those together have allowed me to be an advocate for clean, safe, equitable transportation solutions. And boy, do I have good news for you if you are a ferry buff. We did big things this year when it comes to our state ferry system. So we passed a historic 16-year transportation package. And in that, and I have my notes here, I want to make sure I get this right. We have $1.3 billion with a B dollars to purchase and construct 4 new hybrid electric ferries. And in addition, $193 million to convert existing ferries to hydroelectric. So it's two problems, right? It's having more vessels because we know that our infrastructure is aging and out of date. And that's a lot of the time we're seeing those delays is because the vessels are just out of commission and we can't use them. Second is workforce. And as vice chair of the House Labor Committee, workforce issues is really important to me and a lot of the work that I do. We have a ton of money that we're going to be investing in recruiting the next generation of ferry workers to the fleet because we know that population is aging out and we're just not able to attract new people to fill in those shifts. So lots of good work on that front. I've heard a lot about that actually at the Queen Anne Farmers Market in the summers. A lot of you all are very much impacted by this dilapidated ferry systems. And I'm really, really glad that we're finally going to address them. And you should know that your governor, Jay Inslee, cares a lot about ferries because he does have his primary home on Bainbridge Island. And so we had a lot of great advocates around this issue. And Noel and I were both proud to support that package and the supplemental transportation budget that really puts investments into our ferry systems. Yay, ferries.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really glad, Liz, that you've highlighted the workforce issues because, we've heard about this for a long time in the maritime industry in our district in the 36 that we have such an aging workforce and it's such an amazing opportunity. I see kids entering. Okay, so something that folks may probably know, Liz and I together probably have the youngest kids of any delegation in the House. And this is, do you want to introduce?
Eleanor.
This is
hi to everybody. You're on TV.
And Eleanor is about 10 months older than my son, Holden, who's not quite 20 months. Eleanor and Holden love each other. They got to go to the zoo with each other in December, and they held hands, and it was
very fun. And Noel and I are members of the House Democratic Moms Caucus, helping to advocate for issues for moms and families in the legislature. We're proud to do that. But it's bedtime around here, so Eleanor is coming to say goodnight. Love you. Okay, bye.
Good night, Eleanor. Yeah, I guess while we're on Moms Caucus, we should totally celebrate a bill that I introduced, the Senate companion passed, which is expanding the diaper subsidy for families receiving temporary assistance for needy families. Liz and I can tell you, diapers are not cheap. They are required for daycare. With the cost of with inflation being at the highest it is in 40 years, the cost of diapers has gone up. It is a huge barrier for folks going back to work if they can't afford diapers to have their kids in daycare. So we're really excited that was a huge Mom Caucus priority. And I was proud to introduce the House version of that along with our colleague, Rep. Jesse Johnson, who has a 6-month-old son and is also quite familiar with the cost of diapers. So thanks for that.
I really took us off track, didn't I, with that? Okay, go.
That was totally okay. Okay, so Megan, did you put a new question up for us, or did we just get?
I have not. No, it was right there at the end that Eleanor came in.
We're just having fun. So
we were talking about the ferries, and I was just saying, like, Liz, thank you for flagging the workforce issue. We've been hearing about this for years as like a maritime community, how important these jobs are. It was so important when we passed the Workforce Education and Investment Act last year that those funds be used towards apprenticeships in addition to degrees. And these are great jobs that we should make sure that there's access to. So I just really, Liz, just want to say +1 on flagging the workforce issues, and glad that we're tackling that. All right, Megan, back to you.
Thank you. So our next question this evening is about cost of living. How are you going to reduce the cost of living in the 36th district?
Great question. So cost of living is a huge issue. And, if I'm being perfectly honest, some of it's within our control and some of it's, we're talking right now about really unique economic factors. Like, we've had cost of living going up and up and up and up over the last decade, especially. And a lot of that is housing, but like the combination of the highest inflation in 40 years, still continuing issues with supply chain, frankly, and now an international conflict driving up fuel prices. And then just the weird circumstances around just the last 2 years of the pandemic, having employee shortages, which Liz and I can tell you from personal experience. We have a lot of folks not rejoining the workforce because they can't rely on school and daycare to stay open, and they don't feel confident going back into the workforce until they know that their kids are going to be taken care of. And so there's a lot of unique factors that are driving up costs in a lot of ways. I will say, I think that the tactic that we took in the legislature last year and this year is meeting this moment where we have known that there were deep economic inequities in Washington state, but the pandemic really laid that bare for us to see. And as we're coming out of the tail end of this pandemic, I mean, fingers crossed, we made really important targeted investments on household costs to really make sure that, people's basic needs were being met. So we've talked, for instance, about rent already and the $45 million of rent assistance. We looked at childcare. We put another $50 million into Working Connections childcare, which we just spoke to. Again, people that are trying to go to work, need to have their kids in daycare. Utility assistance, whether it's broadband, water, garbage, recycling. Utilities can often add up to a lot. And we know that one of the biggest predictors of whether or not somebody's going to be homeless is if their utilities are getting shut off because they're making hard decisions. They're not paying their utilities, and the next thing they don't pay is their rent, and that's when they become homeless. So $160 million towards utility assistance, $94 million towards food assistance. We know a lot of Washington families were food insecure before the pandemic. Again, lots of folks even more food insecure. And then we made some really important investments in literally our community's most vulnerable folks. The Age Blind Disabled program, we put some investments in. Our refugees, particularly, refugees that are coming in, like Afghan refugees and others that are coming into our community, needing some additional supports. So that's the tack that we took to help deal with sort of inflation, is really targeted investments for those that are right on the brink with basic household needs. And hopefully some of these economic factors will start to level out moving forward. That's certainly revealing itself in tax policy as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. So we're now going to go to another question. This one is on electrification. So what work has been done to support our state's electric transition?
I'll take that one. As a member of the Environment and Energy Committee, this is something that the legislature has really put front and center the last couple of years I've been there. Again, I only have the last few years to pull on here as a legislator, but following the Climate Commitment Act last year, where we put in place a historic cap and invest program here in Washington in a way to collect dollars, then reinvest in green infrastructure here in Washington. We are now putting those to work in investments that the transportation package is making over the next 16 years. We voted on bills, everything from reducing carbon emissions and making buildings more electric, which we know buildings are the second highest source of carbon emissions after transportation sector. Boring things like energy efficiency standards and appliances and energy siting codes, really cool things that I was excited about and kind of geeking out about, but might be kind of dull for others. We also, our historic budget, supplemental budget this year had $103 million for low emission vehicles and infrastructure for us to build in this state. I'm a huge fan of solar. I'm come from a state of Arizona, and they are way ahead of us on what they're doing in Arizona on solar. We could be doing so much better here in Washington. $58 million for solar investments here in Washington in the supplemental package. And again, I want to go back to that transportation package that I mentioned now a couple of times, and I have my notes here. I want to read them so I get this right. $5.4 billion, billion with a B, that's money from the Climate Commitment Act dollars that we are going to be investing in projects and programs to directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions with transit, bike, and pedestrian investments. $3 billion for reliability and transit service. Think about what that means for our urban district here in the 36. This is huge. $290 million for safe routes to schools to make sure that our kids are safe when they're going to school every day. And something that I'm really excited about, back to ferries, 18 people 18 years and under ride transit and ferries for free. How cool is that? So we're starting kids young on using these services so that they're more accustomed to it when they become adults. We know the studies show that if you use it while you're young, you'll use it again when you're older. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. We have more work to do. I'll just be honest with you, it has been a huge fight around the decarbonization of buildings and going to more electric buildings. We've got more work to do on that. We took little baby steps this year. We're going to keep hitting home on that in the years to come, and you can count on our support to get there. So thank you for that question.
And I'm going to riff off you just ever so slightly, Liz, because you flagged something that I want to make sure we highlight too. You mentioned safe routes to schools. And I know one of the places in our district that is the scariest from a safety standpoint is when our kids cross over Aurora Avenue over to Robert Eaglestaff and Cascadia. And you'll be pleased to know that within that transportation budget was $50 million for Aurora Avenue. And I just the big props to the Reimagine Aurora Coalition, the 99 Problems group. I think that's really important work to really reimagine Aurora Avenue. And I think, right now that group's been really focused on roughly sort of 84th to 110th, right below the Washelli Cemetery. Obviously, there's work that's needed all the way up to 145th. And I will tell you, in the new lines, that part of the Aurora Avenue actually does not stay in the 36th district. But I know Liz and I are deeply committed. It's obviously something like I drive through every single day as a North Ender. And it's something our district cares about a lot, that we'll continue to focus on safety on Aurora Avenue moving forward, and excited about that $50 million investment. All right, Megan, we're ready.
Yes, great. Thank you. So we're now going to go, this is a question that was both submitted beforehand and has been submitted live. So the question is, I'm glad children with developmental disabilities receive state support, but that assistance often appears when they grow up, or often disappears when they grow up. Adults with developmental disabilities have higher rates of depression, anxiety, heart disease, homelessness, joblessness, and loneliness. What's being done?
Thanks so much for the question. And I just want to acknowledge first and foremost that present day the level of investment that we as a state make in our friends and neighbors with developmental and intellectual disabilities is deeply embarrassing. We are one of the lowest ranked states in investment in this part of our community. So I am really, really, really pleased to share. We made massive strides forward this year. Still a lot of work to do, but we are getting there. Few things. One, over the last several years, we've been sort of ticking away at ending sub-minimum wage for people with disabilities. I passed a bill a few years ago to say the state as an employer is not going to pay people with disabilities a sub-minimum wage. A year later, we banned it for all Washington employers. And this year we passed another piece of legislation saying where prevailing wage is used, we will not have sub-minimum or sub-prevailing wage certificates issued by Washington state employers anymore. Really proud of that. Another thing is we have a no services caseload, which is not a wait list, but is a wait list. And there's a few things about that. One, we don't even know who all qualifies. And so we passed a bill to say we're going to have 2 caseworkers assigned to the no services caseload. We are going to make sure they are talking to folks who qualify but are not getting services, making sure that they know what services, sometimes federal, that they qualify for and get them connected. That's one thing. And another one is that we said we're going to start doing caseload forecasting. At this point, it's courtesy caseload forecasting, which means it's not an entitlement, but it's actually going to start putting a dollar figure and help us fully understand how much need is out there and what the price tag is. Where the rubber will really hit the road in future years is if we actually pay for it once we know how much it costs. I am hopeful. And frankly, given some of the work that I'm doing on tax reform and progressive revenue, I know there's a lot of interest in thinking about finally honoring our commitment to our neighbors with disabilities if we are able to pass some of those different tax revenue bills moving forward. So I think we've made some great strides. I am deeply committed and have worked in really close partnership with the developmental disabilities community to make these strides, but lots of work ahead. And I'm so grateful for the question.
Great. Thank you for your response. So we're now going to go to another live question. This question is, how will the legislature provide equitable access to students needing remote access to classes?
Well, really quickly, I would say, I mean, we've done so much from the state to expand access to broadband, which is huge. And I think making sure that every student has connectivity where they live or accessible for them to visit somewhere with reliable internet for them to plug in if they need to do that remotely is huge. And we've done a lot of investments in that. Also, if you're a Seattle public school student, every one of those students has access to a tablet or laptop, depending on the level you're in. So like my kindergartner, George at John Hay, they gave all the kids, I couldn't believe they gave 5-year-old tablets, but they did. They gave all the 5-year-olds tablets. So that is huge for you at home if you do not have access to that kind of technology, so you can be on par with other students in your class. Those are some things we're doing. And again, I mean, I just want to reiterate how proud I am to have voted on the budget this year, the supplemental budget, that for the first time in years and years and years, fully funded school nurses, counselors, mental health professionals. When George started kindergarten this year, I was shocked that his school nurse only came 1 or 2 days a week. And I said to the school, well, kids get sick 5 days a week. I had heard it from all of you. To live it as a parent was shocking. And I knew we had to do something. Well, it worked. Your advocacy was amplified throughout every single legislator in the state of Washington, including the governor, all the way to the highest levels. And we delivered on those promises this year. I'm really proud of that. And I'm sure Noelle has more to add because education is one of her things. So Noelle, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, I actually kind of want to bridge it back to the developmental disabilities question. And, I will just say that this last couple of years, prior to the pandemic starting, I served as the co-chair of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Committee. And we saw there was a crisis brewing pre-pandemic. And the crisis that is behavioral health trauma amongst our young people has just blown through the roof in this last couple of years. And for our students who are neurodiverse, who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, the co-occurring disorders with behavioral health have been huge. And so what Liz mentioned about the investments in nurses, counselors, social workers, critical. I think these investments in broadband, both like access to, like letting utilities offer it, making capital investments in it through the capital budget, the digital equity around the devices, so that, again, some kids do well in person, some kids are going to need to stay remote to some degree, that we are making the investments both policy wise to allow more services to be offered, but also like the actual dollars and drawing down federal money, so that students can really be successful in the environment that's best suited to them, and they have the tools and resources in the human beings that they need to support them. So I agree with Liz. It was an important budget 2 years in a row to really support our families here in Washington during this pandemic.
Great. Thank you both for your responses. We're now going to go to another question. This one is on guaranteed basic income. When will we see recurring guaranteed or universal basic income payments? And based on how she perked up, I think Rep Barry would like to answer.
Oh my gosh, did this person write this question for me? Because that is brilliant. So I had a bill this year, 2009, to establish the Evergreen Basic Income Trust here in Washington, to provide unrestricted cash payments to our neighbors living in poverty. So first of all, too many Washingtonians are living in or on the brink of poverty, and we have to do something to end that. I was shocked when I learned there was a recent survey of 10,000 grocery workers in the Western region, 78% of them. So these are people who have jobs, live on minimum wage. They probably have one or two jobs, struggle to meet their basic needs when it comes to housing, food, shelter, childcare. That's unacceptable to me. And we know that giving people cash with no strings attached actually does work. We saw that last year with the stimulus payments the federal government sent people. That lifted over 11 million Americans out of poverty. Poverty fell to its lowest rate in decades, because we were giving people cash and allowing them to decide how to use it to the needs they saw made the most sense. Here's the deal. We have a pilot study that's being conducted right now about how we could conduct a guaranteed basic income program in the state of Washington. Now, no state has done this anywhere. We've seen this on local levels. Tacoma's doing one, King County's doing one, Seattle's conducted one. There have been wonderful pilots all over the country. A state has not taken this on themselves. DSHS is currently conducting a pilot study. It's going to be released in June. I intend to take a look at what that says and reintroduce a bill in the next session that would probably implement many of the recommendations, if not all, for us to conduct our own pilot program in the state of Washington next year. And what's most important, key, not only the policy part, but to fund that, because it will be expensive. So to also make sure it's funded so we can get some real data out of it and show the world that this works and really set it up for success here in Washington. I really believe that giving people unrestricted cash payments sets them up to live a life of dignity and respect and decide how best to support their families and themselves. When people have the opportunity to not be worrying about where they're going to get their next paycheck or pay for food or pay for housing, they have the privilege that I have, the privilege that Noel has, and so many of you listening have, to reimagine a different future for them and their families. And I think that's why it's important that we explore this program more. So I'm very, as you can tell, I just nerded out like Noel nerds out on taxes, but I'm really excited about guaranteed basic income. So thank you for that question.
Okay, so let's like take the nerd out to the next level, because I think this is what's actually really interesting is we're seeing like really important conversations about economic justice and wealth inequalities and like how we tackle that. And like Liz is talking about UBI and like having direct cash payments, which is really an important conversation for us to have, because the state of Washington doesn't actually have like a direct relationship with its taxpayers, because we don't have an income tax. We don't have a really easy, direct way to get cash to our residents, which is why you heard me say earlier with the Working Families Tax Credit, like we would have loved to expand it this year, but it's literally not stood up because we don't have a program. As Liz is thinking about UBI, I'm thinking about and continuing to work on the Washington State Wealth Tax, where I want, Washington residents, including some of literally the wealthiest people in the world, to pay their fair share. These things are not unrelated. So I just want you to know, like, you've got massive economic justice champions in this conversation that are really thinking thoughtfully about systemic change and how these things work together. So I'm just really excited that Liz is championing that issue, and I see it working really well with stuff that I'm working on. We saw an interesting bill around baby bonds and doing savings accounts for low-income children that are born into low-income families, and the incredible long-term benefits that may have to addressing wealth inequalities. It's all connected, folks. And I think the 36th district, given who we are and the incredible economic and frankly white privilege that we have in our district, we can and should be the leaders on tackling economic inequality in our community and our state. And I'm just like, the fact that I've got this partner to do it with, we're pretty happy about that. So
it's like a love fest.
We kind of like each other, if you guys can't tell.
Okay, moderator, what's next?
Ooh, Megan, you might be muted if you're talking.
Maybe I am. Apologies. I muted myself again. Yes, we are going to our next question on Washington Cares. So the question is, has there been any update on the WA Cares Act? I'll be within retirement age in about 7 years and want to know if I can be fully vested in the system when it starts.
I'm happy to take that one, and just thanks for the question. For folks, I assume most people are familiar now with what WA Cares, what that is, but it's our Long-Term Care Trust Act. It's a bill that we passed back in 2019. I think that was before. So I voted for it, Liz. You were not in yet, but it then was implemented this year. I think it caught some people by surprise, particularly in the context of the pandemic. People just kind of weren't quite tuned in. And then when it happened, I think folks had a lot of questions. And one of the big questions was about folks near retirement age who wouldn't have the full 10 years to contribute and get vested in the program before they retired. So happy to share. These are some of the first changes that we made in the session. I think that was on the governor's desk by like week 3. So we delayed implementation of the program, including delaying collections of the payment for 18 months. We added a number of voluntary exemptions for folks like border state residents, military spouses, disabled veterans, and then non-immigrant visa holders. And then to answer your question specifically, I'm going to look at my notes here because I want to make sure I get it right. We changed it so folks that are born before January 1st, 1968, who are not paying that premium for the 10 years required before they retire, can get partial benefits under the trust program. And basically it's like for every year where you work that minimum 500 hours, you can receive 10% of the maximum number of benefit units. And if you work in the, last three in the last 6 years, you still have a chance to get full benefits. So that pro rata approach to being able to get in for folks that are close to retirement as we're implementing this program. One of the bills we passed this year does tackle that issue. So really happy to report that, yes, based on what you put in your question, it sounds like that would meet your needs. So thanks for the question. It's a really important program, and we really want to make sure it works because, frankly, a vast majority of Washington residents have not planned for their long-term care. And it's something that as policymakers, we're seeing an aging population in Washington state, which might surprise a lot of people, but our overall population is aging. This is going to be a massive expense. And right now the situation is people are spending down into poverty to qualify for Medicaid to get these supports. And that is a really unsustainable approach to a really big issue. So I believe strongly in the Washington Cares Act and having families invest now so that they have this benefit, particularly for family caretakers. I mean, Liz and I are both at an age where we've got aging parents, and it frankly falls mostly on women, disproportionately falls on women to be caretakers for aging adults and their families. And this benefit is something that could pay a family member to help care for you in your home, which is really the best and most cost-effective way to address long-term care. So we're hoping that that helps with this, and glad that we're making some changes to the program. Thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you for your response. So we're now going to go to a question on NDAs. The question is, corporate non-disparagement agreements are often thrust upon workers under financial duress in exchange for severance payments as part of separation agreements. The Silence No More Act passed this year will begin to limit those agreements in important ways. But would you be open to introducing new legislation to sunset all corporate non-disparagement agreements after a certain period of time?
I will take that because the Silence No More Act was my bill, and I'm so proud Governor Inslee is signing it tomorrow. I just learned a few hours ago. That is a great question. I would be very open to seeing how we can expand the law. And just to review with folks who aren't familiar with it, this legislation that we passed this year is the second in the nation after California that will ban the use of non-disclosure agreements and settlement agreements when it comes to silencing workers when they have experienced illegal behavior in the workplace, when it comes to discrimination, harassment, assault, retaliation, wage theft. And what's so important about the bill we passed and why we received, I mean, it was a huge lift. We had a lot of opposition from, quite honestly, business community members who said that it was not a good thing to do. And the reason this was such a big lift is because 99% of the silencing actually happens after the illegal activity takes place. So in the settlement agreements, not at the front end of employment when you're signing non-disclosure agreements. And so what we say is that you can still sign those agreements, they're still legal, and you can still have secrecy when it comes to trade secrets, when it comes to even the amount of money that might be paid out to a worker, but you cannot force the worker to not speak about their experiences. And what's important about this is it's about healing for that worker. It's about letting other workers at that workplace know there might be illegal conduct taking place. It's about creating a network for workers to lean on each other in times of crisis. I am really proud this bill passed. It was a heavier lift than I expected, but we got it done. And I am very much open to seeing how we can expand it in years to come to make sure that these secret agreements aren't even really used. I mean, in California and Massachusetts, for example, where we have some of the biggest tech states in the whole entire world, right? NDAs are illegal. You're not allowed to sign them. You're not allowed to sign and tell people that they can't work at different places or they can't talk about what happens at a job. So, we could explore something like that here in Washington. So I really, really appreciate the question. And as vice chair of a labor workplace standards committee, this is an issue I'm going to continue to work on. So if you've got more good ideas, pass them my way. Thanks for that.
Great, and thank you. So we're now going to go on to a question about economic justice. So they just wanted to say a big thank you to the both of you for extending help to families who need diapers for their little ones. And what else are we doing to support economic justice in Washington?
Well, thanks for the question. We obviously started to talk about it a little bit earlier. I always say tax justice is economic justice. And so how we structure our state's tax code, people often say that budgets are moral documents, that they speak to our values. So does the way that we collect our revenue. And we are sort of like values corrupt when it comes to our tax code. We have the worst tax code in the country. Asking the lowest income families to pay 7 times more in taxes than the wealthiest among us. It's unacceptable and it's got to change. So that's a conversation that is happening. You've heard Liz talk about UBI. I mentioned the baby bonds earlier. These are important things that are happening. I do want to touch for a moment on what I think is probably one of the most critical issues around economic justice that frankly we're really missing the mark on. And I think we have work ahead of us. And again, I think the 36th district is uniquely poised to tackle, which is on access to housing. There are few things more critical to somebody's economic security than the roof over their head. And I think the legislature for many years has done really tremendous work on rental housing, but we've done very little on providing access to home ownership, which of course is about sort of predictable housing costs for families, but it's also a tool of wealth building for families. Access to home ownership has been the primary tool of wealth building for the middle class in this country for decades. It is a tool that was actively denied to Black and brown families for generations by redlining, by straight up discriminatory practices, preventing them from accessing federal loans. And folks, we think about that as being something in the past. Generational wealth and how that presents generations and decades later is very real, and it's real in our community. So I am excited about work that is underway. We've talked about the UBI pilot. We've talked about the wealth disparities and baby bonds work group. There's also a work group on racial disparities in home ownership that started earlier this year that I hope will come back and provide us some really strong recommendations about what are the different tools. We have down payment assistance programs here in the state. Frankly, this is how I own a home in the 36th district, is I had down payment assistance from the state. I'm worried that it's disproportionately white families that are benefiting from that program. So how are we really using that as a tool to address racial disparities in wealth? I'm also seeing really interesting tools like land trusts that are being put to work. I'm sitting in my office in Finney Ridge, which is not in the old 36, but is in the new 36. And Homestead Community Land Trust is building 2 condo buildings on the ridge that are permanently affordable homes that is going to really support sort of income diversity in our community. I don't know about you all, but I'm excited about that. And that's a core element of economic justice in economic diversity in our community. I think we have a role to support that moving forward, and I'm excited about that work. We have a supply issue. That's part of it. Zoning is a big part of it. We had a big opportunity with House Bill 1782 this year. That's something that we were very supportive in our delegation. It did not pass. And I think we will be leading on this issue moving forward so that we have better progress next year, in addition to tools like down payment assistance, et cetera, to help with the disparity issue. So hopefully that answers the question. I also am going to jump in. I saw an earlier question that was a follow-up to the question on disabilities about how do folks get connected to the no services caseload. We got to hire the 2 caseworkers that we just passed as part of that bill. Once we get that connected, I'm sure that the Developmental Disabilities Administration will get people connected to those new caseworkers. So I saw that question in real time. I wanted to answer it. Megan, back to you.
Great, thank you. So our next question is, will you support a reduction to the gas tax?
Ooh, I'll take that one. Thank you for that question. Well, we've all been shocked by the price of gas these days, upwards of $5, $6. I mean, I was in Ballard the other day, it was like $6 a gallon, which is insane. I want you to know that we passed a transportation package that did not raise the gas tax. That was a choice that we had as legislators, as a legislative body. We decided to reject that choice. There was also another proposal on the table, and I'm reading my notes, I get this right, the fuel export tax. I heard loud and clear when that was in the House proposed transportation package. I actually voted on that proposal out of the Transportation Committee, and I heard loud and clear from all of you, from our constituents, especially a lot of our maritime businesses, that was just a no-go. That was not going to be something that would be well received. It would increase the price, everything from fish, from our fishers who bring all of that back here to our district, to our tech industry sector. We then decided not to pursue that angle for additional revenue. It was, I think, an additional $2 billion in revenue in the package, and decided to instead look at money from our Public Works Assistance account. So that's what we ended up doing to help fund the package. I'm proud that we didn't go for the fuel export tax, and also that we decided not to raise the gas tax because of all of the difficult times that everyone's facing right now with the high price of gas. So I appreciate your question about reducing the gas tax right now. I'm really proud that we were able to hold the line and not do any more damage around that. And I think that's something that we should look at in future sessions. It's certainly something we rely too heavily on the gas tax in our state to fund transportation projects. We need to honestly be looking at more of a road usage charge. For example, I drove my electric vehicle down to Olympia and back today, and I didn't use gas to get there. I used electric charging station when I got to the Capitol building, which was really fun to use for the first time. So I should be charged for those miles that I just drove on I-5 to help make sure I-5 is maintained and ready for everybody to use. So I think there's a lot of different things and formulas we can be looking at in the years to come. It's a very difficult challenge. I know we're up to it, and I'm hoping to be a part of that conversation on the Transportation Committee. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing on the fuel export tax. Just a big thanks. We had a lot of folks in our maritime industry in particular that were quite worried about retaliation from Alaska in particular to our fishing industry. And, that's something that we always have to keep in mind. when we do things in Washington State and the impacts that it will have on our constituents. And so I was grateful to folks in the maritime industry in our community really flagging what they were worried about and finding sort of a middle path solution there. So always things that you have to weigh. So I know Liz mentioned that, but just want to say we were listening very intently to some of our, working maritime industry folks here in the 36th.
Great. Thank you both for your responses. So now we're going to go on to what is likely our final question. But the question is, now that the 2022 legislative session has come to a close, what's one policy or budget proviso you were most excited to see cross the finish line this year?
I'm happy to go first. We already mentioned it.
Go for it.
We already mentioned the diaper bill, which is exciting. But I actually, this was the first session for me that I spent disproportionately more time on the budget than I did on bills. It's actually the first of, this is my 7th session, and it's the first session I didn't pass a bill with my own name on it because I was so focused on the budget. And the piece that I have been really focused on since the beginning of the pandemic is investment in our small business community and access to small business assistance and other work. Again, talking earlier about economic recovery has been uneven. And while some industries have thrived in our state, and I think our tech sector in particular has really thrived, most industries have not. And as we are getting back into real normal life, fingers crossed, like we want to make sure that these small businesses that we love, these tourist destinations where we've created memories, that they're still there. When the pandemic ends, we've lost something like 25% of our small businesses in the state. And so to me, this was where I really focused my energy. I'm really proud to share just a massive package, $100 million of assistance to our hospitality industry, including our hardest hit restaurants, $25 million of assistance to arts and culture and heritage organizations, including those under $5 million of revenue, and then a special small pot of money, about $5 million for some of our larger cultural institutions right here in the 36th. I personally put in a request for a small business competitiveness and innovation fund of almost $35 million that will do everything from small business incubators to mentorship for business owners of color to, improvements that businesses need to make to respond to the pandemic, like streeteries and frankly, vandalism, repairs related to vandalism. We've seen, frankly, a lot of that here in our own district. It's just kind of a reflection of the challenging times right now, but we've got that fund in there. And there's just so much more stuff. Disaster response, something I'm really proud of. When the Greenwood gas explosion happened in 2016, there was no help for those small businesses, and we lost permanently a lot of businesses in Greenwood. We just passed a $20 million fund for natural disasters and comparable disasters like major utility disruptions, i.e. a gas explosion, to have a fund to go to. If something like that were to happen again in our community, small businesses would have something to help them hold on until they got insurance and other support. So overall, I'm very excited about that. And finally, we did an update to the small business tax credit. We haven't updated that in decades. And now have increased the filing threshold to small businesses, $125,000 or less, simply won't have to file and will have a credit against their business taxes owed. That is a huge help to a lot of working families in Washington State who have chosen a path of having a small business for their own economic self-determination. I'm really excited about sort of this era of entrepreneurship that's opening up in Washington State, and I want us to invest in it. And that's probably my proudest accomplishment this session. I could talk about things I'm disappointed by, I want to say next year, but Liz, we're running out of time. So over to you.
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Because there was a tech thing.
There was a tech thing, but we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. Just checking. Noel mentioning the work we've done for our cultural organizations, I think is key because we're very proud we represent probably the densest cultural district, arts, heritage, culture district in the whole state. I was really proud to, one of my top funding asks was the $5 million we got for the larger budget cultural organizations who are really struggling with those COVID related costs, the operas, the ballets, think of the bigger guys. But again, there's going to be $45 million for the smaller budgeted arts and culture organizations that we're really excited about. And I'm just going to close it like I started it. I am so proud of the 3 major pieces of legislation we passed to end gun violence in our communities. High capacity magazines, we've been working on that, I think, for 9 years. We got that done. That will save lives. Okay, period, end of statement. My bill to ban ghost guns will save lives, and we will not allow for intimidation in places where we vote and where people gather for school board or city hall meetings. I am really proud of that work because it's personal for me, as you all know my story. I was also able to help secure over $8 million to fund the Office of Firearm Safety and Prevention that was stood up at the Department of Commerce in 2020 to allow for community-based organizations to get money from the state to interrupt gun violence directly in their communities. And we've seen this model work all over the country. We have quite honestly been slow to set it up. We can do better here in Washington, especially because gun violence is now the #1 way that teens and children are killed in our state. As a mother, this is devastating to me, and I know we can do better. So that's what I'm excited about that we accomplished this year in Olympia.
Great job, Liz. She's kind of a dynamo. Knocking out as a freshman.
Okay, I have a question for Noel, which is, Noel, tell me what it's like legislating kind of hybrid this year on Zoom with Holden, little baby.
Representative Baby is learning tax policy by osmosis. It's been a real it's been such a saving grace to be able to do this work remotely with having an infant last year and then a toddler this year. I both loved it in some moments and hated it in other moments. When I've been really, 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 really stressed out, I don't like that he's right next to me. When I feel that, I'm sure he can feel it. But overall, it's been so nice to have that flexibility. And honestly, I don't know exactly what we're going to do next session when we are full in person again. And I know, we have a colleague, Rep Johnson, who is not running for re-election because he's got a 6-month-old at home. And I just want folks to know it's a tough job. It's a part-time job. It's not really well set up for people with families or jobs or that aren't independently wealthy or retired. And it's a real struggle sometimes to manage our responsibilities. And so I'm just grateful to have had the flexibility. I have not been a parent while being a legislator until Holden was born. And so I haven't done it in person. We'll see how it goes, Liz. So it's been nice to have him on camera. We'll see how it goes moving forward. So I've got a question for you though, if you're open to it. So, okay, you've done your entire time in the legislature has been almost entirely remote except the first day. And this last couple of weeks, you got to be in person. What was it like to be in person for the last 2 weeks of session?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. So they allowed us to come back for everyone out there. Just a few, I think it was 20 of us maybe were allowed, and freshmen got priority because we'd never ever been there in person. And I have to tell you, I missed my family immensely. I missed being able to just walk out of my Zoom land voting world and go kiss Eleanor in the bathtub or, go have a bite of dinner with my family. But being there to work on urgent issues as they emerged with people in person, we were solving problems left and right that usually takes a phone call that it's just a whole dramatic thing to do in that way. Speaking on the floor for the first time was really emotional for me. And I had to tell the speaker when I did and I think it was a speech, a really quick amendment speech. It wasn't even a big thing, but I just said, I'm nervous, I'm doing this. And I even held the microphone too far away so they couldn't hear me. So it was just all those little things, that rookie moves that you're trying to learn. But I really enjoyed it. I hope that we do keep some hybrid incoming sessions, maybe with committee schedules. I just think the participation we get from so many of you around the state, we can't ignore that. The fact that it just got your government is more accessible to you, I think is really important. If we're going to attract a different kind of legislative body with different diverse lived experiences, we need to make that accessible to them as well. So it was great. It was a dream. I'm so excited to do this work, and it's an honor to represent you. So thank you for that privilege.
Well, I sat right in front of Liz in the 2 weeks that we were on the floor. And again, she knocked it out of the park. Even when the microphone was too low, we could still hear her. She did great. So Good. I'm glad you like that question, Liz. All right, Megan, I think we're out of time. So back to you.
We are. But I wanted to give you both an opportunity if there were any final comments that you wanted to make before I kind of close us out.
Honestly, I kind of think we did it. Like, it's just a privilege. Thanks for talking with us for an hour. Got to see a little bit of just how we are as human beings. Like, super thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. So that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you so much for attending and for submitting questions for your lawmakers. If we did not get to your question, you can directly contact Reps Frame and Barry's offices with your comments. Their contact information will be on the screen shortly. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.